Don't throw me out. I'll warm your bed, she pleaded, but he chose to warm her heart first. When the storm of conflict between them reached its peak that night, Mira knelt on the cold floor of the cabin, her breath trembling as she looked up at Jaren, the man who had taken her in weeks, earlier when she'd collapsed at the edge of his land, half-frozen, starving, and running from a world that had never offered her mercy. Now that same world seemed determined to pull her away once again. Jaren wasn't a cruel man. Quiet, stubborn, guarded, yes, but never cruel. Yet his jaw was tight, his hands restless at his sides, and she sensed a decision pushing at him like a tide. She had overheard the voices of the men who visited earlier, men from the settlement who believed she didn't belong there, who had warned Jaren that keeping her would only bring trouble. Their voices still echoed in her ears, dripping with suspicion, calling her a burden, a risk, someone who should be sent away before she caused problems for him. Mira, already shaking from fear and exhaustion, felt something inside her break, and she whispered the desperate words she never imagined she'd say. "Don't throw me out. I'll warm your bed." The moment they escaped her lips, she hated herself. For them, not because of the meaning, but because she knew they came from fear, not desire. Her voice cracked, her eyes burned, and she lowered her head, ready to be rejected, ready to be told that she had no place anywhere at all. But Jaren didn't move. In fact, the air between them shifted, not with anger, but something Mira couldn't understand. Jaren knelt in front of her slowly, as though approaching a wounded animal that might bolt, and he lifted her chin with the gentlest touch she had ever felt. His eyes were dark and tired, but not hardened. Instead, they carried a weight that mirrored her own. "Mira," he said softly, "I'm not the kind of man who'd ask that of you. And I'm not throwing you out." His words didn't sound like a promise. They sounded like a truth, carved from the core of him, something he had decided before she even begged. She blinked, confusion mixing with relief so sharp it almost hurt. He brushed a strand of hair away from her cheek, and his fingertips were warm compared to the cold dread that had filled her. "I don't want your fear," he continued. "I don't want your body out of desperation. I've seen enough of the world to know what fear does to people. I won't be another monster in your life." The sincerity in his voice disarmed her completely, and she felt her breath catch. Still trembling, Mira tried to explain, stumbling over her words, telling him how she had nowhere else to go, how she didn't want to be a burden, how she feared the people outside more than she feared the cold. But Jaren shook his head gently and steadied her shoulders. "You think you're a burden, but you're not," he said. "You work hard. You help around the cabin. You treat everything here with more respect than most folks. I've known for years," he hesitated, as though revealing more than he should, and then added, "I don't want you to leave. I just don't know how to keep you safe." Mira had never considered that he might be protecting her for reasons beyond obligation, and her heart tightened unexpectedly. She remembered the days he spent teaching her simple tasks, the quiet meals they shared, the way he let her sit near the fire without crowding her, always giving her space, always watching her with a controlled gentleness that she had once mistaken for indifference. Now she understood it wasn't indifference, it was restraint, and it shook her. She whispered an apology, but Jaren shook his head again and pulled her to her feet with steady hands. "No more apologizing for existing," he said firmly. "If anything, I should apologize. I should have told you sooner that you could stay as long as you needed." He stepped back, giving her room, making sure she didn't feel cornered. That small gesture alone made her chest ache. No man in her past had ever been so careful with her. Mira wiped her eyes, trying to regain control, but her emotions swirled with relief, embarrassment, and something warm she couldn't yet name. For a moment they stood facing each other in silence, and the flickering fire between them painted them in soft amber light. Jaren's voice finally broke the stillness. "You're not here to warm my bed," he said. "But maybe someday you'll let me warm your heart." It was the first time he had spoken anything close to affection, and Mira felt her breath stop. The sentence didn't demand, it offered. And for the first time in a long time, she felt her fear loosen its grip. She stood straighter, steadier, meeting his eyes fully for the first time since she arrived on his land. She could see it now, the care, the conflict, the quiet longing he tried so hard to hide. And though she couldn't yet voice what stirred inside her, she knew that something had shifted between them in a way that could never be undone. Jaren gave her a small nod, as if acknowledging that shift, then gently told her to rest. But as she turned toward her small room, she found herself pausing at the doorway. "Jaren, thank you," she whispered. And though he didn't respond aloud, she saw the way his shoulders eased, as if her words had struck a place inside him that had been tense for far too long. In the days that followed their quiet yet life-altering conversation, an unspoken understanding settled between them, forming a delicate bridge of trust neither dared to disturb. And Mira found herself watching Jaren in new ways, studying the patience in his movements, the silent thoughtfulness in his eyes, the way he always seemed aware of her presence without ever overwhelming her. She had spent so many years expecting cruelty from the world that she didn't know how to accept gentleness. But Jaren offered it not as a grand gesture, rather as steady consistency, as though kindness was simply woven into the way he existed. He repaired the broken latch on her door without her asking. He left an extra blanket folded neatly on the chair when the nights grew colder. He began teaching her how to carve small wooden figures, guiding her hands with a touch so light she barely felt it. And each time their fingers brushed by accident, a flustered warmth bloomed in her chest, a feeling both strange and dangerously comforting. Still, not everything around them softened. Tension with the nearby settlement tightened as rumors spread about the woman staying alone with the quiet rancher, who kept to himself. Mira overheard snippets when supply deliveries came, whispers about the outsider, the runaway, the girl who didn't belong, and though she tried to hide it, their words stung. Jaren noticed her silence one evening as they sat near the fire, and after a long pause he asked gently, "You think I care what they say?" She tried to shrug it off, but he leaned forward, meeting her eyes with steady conviction. "They don't decide who belongs here. I do." The weight of that statement struck her deeper than anything he'd said before, and she realized then that this wasn't mere protection. Jaren had chosen her presence, not tolerated it. Slowly, Mira began to reclaim pieces of herself she had long abandoned. She laughed more often, though quietly. She worked beside Jaren, repairing fences and tending animals. She shared small fragments of her past, testing the safety of vulnerability. And Jaren listened, not with pity, but with a quiet respect that made her feel seen. One evening, as they gathered food for the horses, she felt bold enough to ask him something she had carried for weeks. "Why did you help me that night?" Jaren paused, leaning on the fence, his expression thoughtful. "Most people would have walked past me," she added softly. He looked at her then, really looked at her, as though weighing years of unspoken truths. "Because I've been forgotten before," he said. "I know what it feels like to have nowhere to go." Mira felt her chest tighten. It was the most he had ever revealed about himself. She stepped closer, just enough that their shoulders nearly touched, and though he didn't move toward her, he didn't pull away either. Their closeness felt natural, like two souls slowly learning to occupy the same space without fear. Days turned into weeks, and Jaren began teaching her new skills, how to track footprints, how to navigate the land, how to understand the behavior of animals. He said it was important she learned to defend herself, but Mira sensed another truth beneath his lessons. He wanted her to feel capable, not dependent. That alone warmed her more deeply than anything she had ever known. One afternoon, while gathering water near the creek, Mira slipped on the damp rocks and would have fallen if Jaren hadn't caught her with swift, steady arms. The moment froze them both. She was pressed against his chest, his hands clasped around her waist, their breaths tangled in the cool air. Mira looked up and saw something in his eyes she had only glimpsed before, raw affection, restrained only by his fear of crossing a line she hadn't clearly drawn. She felt her pulse quicken, her hands lightly gripping his coat, and for a moment she wondered if she should look away, break the tension, offer a joke to ease the moment. But she didn't. Instead, she let herself stay there, Suspended in the fragile closeness they had both been tiptoeing around for weeks. Jaron slowly loosened his hold, not pushing her away, but giving her the choice. Mira made it. She didn't step back. She stood on her own but remained near him, close enough that he could feel the warmth of her presence. "Jaron," she said softly, "you said once that someday I might let you warm my heart." A faint, almost disbelieving smile touched his lips. "I remember." Mira took a breath, not of fear but courage. "I think I'm ready for that." Jaron didn't rush toward her or pull her into his arms. Instead, he lifted a hand and touched her cheek with a tenderness that made her shiver. "Then I'll take care of it," he whispered, gently, and as she leaned her forehead against his chest, feeling his arms circle her with a warmth deeper than anything she had pleaded for in desperation weeks ago, Mira understood that love built from kindness, slow, patient earned, not only warms the heart, it heals it. And Jaron, quiet and steadfast, had chosen not the warmth of a moment, but the warmth of a future they could build together, one filled not with fear or uncertainty, but with the promise of belonging,